Well met, lords and ladies, Jacob Vado speaking, and a warm welcome to this week's Walking Wednesday. I've often said that I would walk to the ends of the earth to do one of these, and I indeed have. After all these years, we're in Finisterre, Fisterra, there's many words, end of the earth, essentially. This is where they thought it ended, and this is where they supposedly found Santiago. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Spider-Man. Like, all of them, of course. So, it's been a thing almost every year that we're here, that there's a new Spider-Man movie, and it just so happens that the cinema, which has, again, I remind people, a selection of about 4 different movies, as you know, only 4 movies at a time, because they only have 4 rooms. It's a very small cinema that we go to. So, it just so happens that, if there's ever a Spider-Man one, that one is always on the list. And so, it's what we've done that for, Far From Home. We did that for Far From Home twice, in fact, because 1 year we couldn't work out what to see, so we watched it twice. I think we might have... No, I didn't do it for No Way Home, watched that in English. Maybe it is just one. I could have sworn there was more than just one. But oh well. Once again, we're here around the time they release a Spider-Man movie. And at last, after 3 weeks, I managed to convince just my dad to watch it. I've had issues. Aiden has, of course, he watched it on the first day that it came out in the US. Or the second day, rather, because he works in a movie theatre, so he gets to occasionally watch the odd screening here or there. And at the start of the month of June, I think, he was itching to tell me everything, or to talk about this movie with me. So, and unfortunately, because again, I don't tend to go to the cinema unless it is, in fact, here, that I was not able to say anything. And not only that, but I had not even seen the first one. I was yet to experience Into the Spider-Verse. So, yeah, that was one of the things I said, okay, if I can't work out, if it's not worth paying a subscription to something just to watch this one movie, then I'll get it on YouTube. So I bought it on YouTube and forgot about it until yesterday, actually. Because again, we've been here for a few weeks now, and it turns out that what I thought this was going to be the first movie to watch, because again, we saw Spider-Man several times. Well, we saw Far From Home at least twice. Again, I might be exaggerating here a bit. But the fact is that, yeah, that was the one that we said, yes, this is the one that is worth returning to. This is the hero, or at least, the IP that we're going to see. Because, of course, Peter Parker as a whole was not as hugely influential in this one, rather than as he was when he was the main character in the other ones. So yeah, that was something. But yeah, basically, I thought, okay, well, that's a guarantee. The other stuff that had come out was like, okay, no one said anything about anything else. The only movie that I knew was going to be a thing soon enough was The Little Mermaid, which just wasn't on, apparently. It was not one of the options. And then as we looked more, we saw that there was other stuff. It's going to see there's usually a film that is either done locally or just in Spain or something, so it becomes part of the selection. But then no. So the reason we watched The Flash the first week was simply because even though Across the Spider-Verse was an option, it was vetoed against by the majority of family under the impulse from my brother, who apparently was not keen to see the cartoon. And so that was there. I thought, oh, my hopes are dashed then. Because actually, I too wanted to see this movie. The reason I haven't watched Into the Spider-Verse is not because I didn't want to. It's because when presented with the opportunity to do so, I ended up actually getting it on DVD, but I needed it as a birthday present for somebody else. So yeah, just never end up seeing it myself. So, and after a while, it just kind of faded. It was one of those movies where, like, the soundtrack of it, like the particular Sunflower song by Post Malone, that one came up several times, particularly in musical Natasha's intro, actually. And blimey, was that something. So I was acutely aware of it at all times. Oh, and of course, I think my time listening to Plays a Battle Angel, so there's that. Yeah, but I really I really ended up just not being in the right place at the right time for, like, how long has it been now? 6 years or something since that film came out. Goodness me. But so yeah, I finally yesterday watched it in preparation for Across the Spider-Verse, and I shall say that is the single best piece of preparation that one can do for this movie. If you're planning to watch it and haven't done so already, make sure you watch the first one, or rewatch, to remind yourself of what is going on. Because, trust me, you will not regret that. When I talked about The Flash briefly, because I didn't actually, that was the week of the demonetization and community guidelines and all of that faff. So that was I had other stuff to talk about. So that one, what I did say, what little I was able to get out, was that if you're really proficient in the lore of DC and stuff, and you're able to get all of the references and cheer at the right moments and stuff, then you'll get way more into it than if you were just going in casually. So but in this version, I think there is a little bit of that, and Across the Spider-Verse has more in terms of using the IP to its advantage, and doing the trend of nostalgia that is so common now, according to the critic, which has faded into lukewarm. But in this case, they already kind of covered most of that. I don't think too many people knew who Miles Morales was before the film came out. I remember watching a YouTube video and being faintly aware. And indeed, I was as shocked as Peter Parker to find out that Peter himself was not the only Spider-Man after all, much like in the movie. So, but yeah, then life happened. But yeah, at last it happened. So, but yeah, I'm not here to review that film, but again, another one of those that I thoroughly enjoyed. And it was refreshing to see something that actually seemed to conclude in its own terms, do its thing, show off precisely as much as it needed to, and take you to the visual planes that only animation itself can do. Once again, the advantage of being animated, rather than disadvantage via the stigma of such. It's interesting that 3D movies are subjected to that same thing as well as 2D, because they're the hype around them at the start in the 90s fizzled out 2D animation almost completely. And lucky enough now, in films like Spider-Verse, comes back. But oh well, I haven't talked about the actual movie itself yet. So yeah, I'll put a chapter somewhere around here, the 10-minute mark, because otherwise Aidan will ask me again what I think. Or perhaps I'll do a separate video with him, actually. I feel like his patience has earned him a nice Siskel and Ebert rendition, I think. Why did I decide to climb while making this? I have no idea. But there you go. I started off down there, incidentally. There you go. That's one thing live action can do. I guess that is it. I mean, coming out of the theatre, my dad actually did say that compared to The Flash and Indiana Jones, the other two movies we watched recently, on a technical level, for him it was the best. But the story was just as ridiculous. I think it is a case of, it's more difficult for my parents, I think, to suspend as much disbelief with these certain movies, or to enjoy them to the same extent. Possibly because they're after that more authentic feel, which, for films like Flash and Indiana Jones, they might be live action, but they are not the subject of that. Arguably, I guess, who knows, maybe the one that we avoided, the summer vacation one. But actually, no, that didn't look very good at all. Yeah, so... But yeah, for me, of course, I guess that's why my dad's reigning endorsement was enough for my brother, and mine was not. Because I gush about animation fairly frequently. But yeah, still an uphill battle to have these things be taken seriously, even by the Academy that awarded the previous film. Well, I guess it was the Oscar for Best Animated Film, so, I mean, there you go. Take that for what you will. It's not the Best Picture nomination at the beginning of the Beast Scott or whatever. I don't know. Okay, actual movie. 12-minute time. Let's start actually talking about it. So, again, bear in mind that I actually watched the previous film just yesterday. I thought I knew pretty much what I was going to get into. And would have... I did have the context, at least. But as far as the actual production itself goes, I mean, immediately, they actually do one of my favourite things, which is, of course, the subversion of expectations. We do not start from the perspective of Miles Morales. By the way, this is a spoiler review, because you didn't read the title. We do not start from the perspective of Miles Morales. We start from the perspective of Gwen Stacy from Universe, from Earth, blah, 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 blah. I don't actually know I don't know the names of all of the different universes. I didn't get... there wasn't that much time to read them. With the YouTube movie, I could actually pause if I wanted to. And did, frequently. But in this one, that's one thing I can say first of all, they keep some of the comic panels, which in the first movie they introduced after Miles got bit by his spider. Or not his spider, we'll get into that. And then the comic panels appear. So they bring that back. And that's, of course, an homage to the fact that one of the things that appealed to comic fans in Spider-Man in the first place was actually the internal narration that he was able to convey across. So yeah, they do that a bit, but they had their own tropes that they could have done. In Nostalgia Critic's Venom review, he did this thing where it was like, all right, let's do this one last time, and then actually fill people in on the details of some of the villains, which I didn't know was a reference to Into the Spider-Verse, but it was. So that was one thing that was Into the Spider-Verse and was not as much. In fact, they tried to do that a couple of times, and it gets cut. Or it gets cut off by people. Just being like, yeah, we'll get to that. We know the idea. Like, I mean, yeah. I guess most people who've been there had seen the first one. Except my dad, I suppose. Then again, the other people in the movie theatre with us, which we didn't know at the time, because actually we were a minute late into the production, were a bunch of kids. So who knows how old they were when the first movie came out, so I guess they must have watched it somewhere later. But yeah, basic idea. Now that I think about it, that's one disadvantage that kids' films have if their sequels come out such a long time in the future, is that I mean, yes, they have the old audience will come back to them, but they also, if they're trying to stick with their target audience and they have a sequel they can't quite follow, maybe that's... Is that where Pixar's failing? Is that what things that Pixar is failing at doing? Their sequels take so long to make that do they just not just not have the same audience that they're targeting, and therefore they're more confused or something? I don't know. Of course, they're banking on the idea that you've watched a bunch of properties and stuff, which again, we'll get into. Beginning of the movie, at 15-minute mark. I do like to talk. Yeah, definitely going to do a Siskel and Ebert review of this. This deserves way more focus than this review is getting. Sorry if I'm panting a lot. I am, once again, on a hill. Unlike Spider-Man, I am not that much of a climber. Unless there are rocks, which I'm not trying to access exclusively here on the grounds that I actually don't have enough hands to stabilize myself in most circumstances. Okay, so again, in the film we missed the first minute, like I said. So the movie was dark. We didn't actually see where anyone was. We just kind of strolled in there. And then it was halfway through Gwen having some sort of argument with what appeared to be a band, and then she had abandoned said band. And let me get more specifics into her Spider-Man story. She says, oh, you know, it's all about this, it seems that you're destined to be a soloist in this career, because again, after the Into the Spider-Verse, all the people who came together because of the freak event that caused their dimensions to fuse, well, this their presence in dimension to fuse, they actually end up all having to go. And that's one of the things that was at the end of the first movie. Miles is lying in his room, and then you hear Gwen's voice from above saying, like, you know, Miles, you got a minute? That one I watched in English, so I know the quotes. And then that was it. That was the end. So it was like, oh, the next adventure will begin. But it felt conclusive. And that's something I'll come back to once again, much later. So yeah, Gwen is feeling alone. In the last movie, we did hear that she didn't make any other friends on purpose outside of Miles and him previously, because her Peter Parker, who was her best friend, actually died, and seemed to be the Lizard in her reality. Although I say that take it with a grain of salt, because I remember that the first Spider-Man battle that Miles witnessed in the first movie was the Green Goblin, and Green Goblin like a lizard. Maybe that's just how they do goblins. I don't know. But yeah, that sets up the precedent that some people's alter egos can end up splitting if someone does or doesn't take up that particular mantle. And there's also no Harry Osborn. So there is that. So yeah, he ends up dying, and of course, in true fashion, we have the Spider-Man crying over, so in this case Spider-Woman, crying over a loved one's body, being found by the chief of police, and then suddenly the chase is on. And of course, this time it's Captain George Stacy, Gwen's father. You know the drill. So that sets up a little bit of an enemy ship, and then eventually there is actually this the first multiverse event, which seems to be as a result of the collider or whatever, some sort of idea that anomalies end up escaping through portals this time, like last time. I guess technically speaking, all the spider gang from the last movie would have all been anomalies by this movie's rules. There's a bit of a battle there. in which we see this woman called Jess, I think is her name, and then Miguel O'Hara, who we saw briefly in the end credits scene at the end of the last movie. It seemed like a bit of a punchline at the end. It was sort of the idea of like, oh, how is it possible for Gwen to contact Miles after all the events? And this is when the end credits went in, and they actually said, okay, so here's someone testing out multiversal properties, ends up essentially making a Solid JJ video before Solid JJ existed, going into the comic panel, not even comic panel style, because that's the whole movie. There's a visual motif of a bunch of comics, which I think they serve as both transitions and also as the issues that they're adapting. I could be wrong on that front. I don't actually know. So yeah, we actually, but yeah, what I meant was one of those where it was like the TV show, but they moved like comic panels because it's just images. And it's a Spider-Man pointing meme. Again, it's always the pointing meme. In fact, they do that later when they have to catch a runaway Spider-Man. And over the phone, they all go, oh, so, attention, all Spider-Men, please go and capture Spider-Man. Oh, Spider-Man, like, you know, that kind of thing. Okay. All right, this is a bit more level ground now. Look where I've come from. I should be panting less now. Yeah, walking up hills is fine. Walking up hills while vlogging, trying to recall a movie you just saw, and talking takes you out of it. But, oh well. With great responsibility, in this case, must hopefully come great power. That's my motto. Because otherwise, good grief, you're going to have to do it. Here's the hoping. Whoa. Okay. So, I've never seen the end of one of those before. Power lines. Dang. So yeah, first anomaly event. They help defeat them. It's the first really funny joke about like Gwen starting to really want to be adopted by Jess, who seems to have gone to a battle while pregnant, and then you know, gushed about, you know, how hot her husband was and stuff like that. It's like, can you adopt me or something? I am paraphrasing, of course, because as you can imagine, I have only seen the Spanish dub because that was what was in the cinema. So stuff like, actually, not even. I was going to say something, but no. No. So moving on, we actually, we go back to Miles. It turns out that he's already looking at colleges and wants to go to Princeton, which I found out in this movie was in New Jersey. I did not know that. So I thought the joke, of course, was that the mother, whose name was Rio, I think, was protesting in that instance, was actually that, you know, the classic New York versus New Jersey rivalry. But no, it turns out it is actually because Miles won't be in Brooklyn anymore. They want to keep him close by, be able to support him, because they fear that the world will not be as kind as they have been to him. Which, of course, makes sense. I mean, there's a big thing with parenthood in this movie, despite the fact that not too many parent characters get as much of a center screen as you might think. We'll get to the noteworthy exceptions later. So we find out in that scene also that Lieutenant Morales, who is Miles' dad, is going to be promoted to captain in a couple of days. So we have that. And that's, of course, part of a celebration that happens later. As we go from Miles' perspective, we see that his disappearances are starting to like really affect his parents. That's one of the big differences between himself and Peter Parker, because I mean, of course, Aunt May is one person who does indeed worry about him, but doesn't seem to exert as much control or authority over him. Simply tends to mainly be a guide and mentor. Although they have subverted that in recent years, obviously. Even in Into the Spider-Verse, the Aunt May in Miles' universe, in fact, does indeed seem to be it does indeed seem to be pretty much more of a much more tech savvy and much more of a force to be reckoned with, or at least as far as the she feels the guy in the chair role, essentially. I mean, the roommate, Miles' roommate, does say, "Oh, I'm not going to be your guy in the chair," so there you are. That was last movie. This movie, she doesn't really show up. Which, now I think about it, I guess you wouldn't have any reason to. Yeah, so at some point we actually do get to the part that I mentioned for Into the Spider-Verse, which is the part where, at the end, where Miles actually, rests on his bed and stuff, which actually, that's a bit of a weird mood shift, because of course, they have to keep consistent with the canon. That's a important factor. So they have to stick to canon, and that ultimately means that in the scene where Miles is grounded for, I think at that point it was like 3 months or so. No, it was 2 months at that point. The punishment gets increased over time, obviously. But he's grounded for 3 months, and he ends up. He just looks really, really content and happy, because of course that was like the end of his other montage at that point. In fact, it's actually a year and like 4 months afterwards, in which case he's supposed to have already gone through a massive growth spurt. I would have to look back at the previous film and see if they accounted for that, because they do mention it a couple of times. In fact, even Gwen in this next scene, when she does indeed appear through the portal, does mention it. And I feel like I should point out as well that, you're asking, okay, you skipped the part where Gwen actually ends up being able to access Miles' dimension to begin with. Because last time she was there, she was an anomaly and couldn't stay there because she was glitching out and would die. And yes, that is indeed what would happen if it hadn't been for the fact that after the battle, with the Renaissance Vulture, the anomaly from before, she actually has to what was I going to say? Do I want to go down all the way? Look at that. Anyway, yeah, she ends up being caught by her dad and then reveals her identity, but he, still thinking she killed Peter Parker, actually starts, reading her the rights and all that stuff, Classic cop. And then, he's tearing up at that point because he has to do his job, but he feels like he's not listening. So Gwen essentially just lost her chance and everything there. So she eventually, Jess says, we can't leave her behind, and Miguel actually reluctantly recruits her for, I guess, whatever spider time force patrol thing is happening. Again, did not hear the term in English, and I don't remember why they're mentioning it in the Spanish one. I guess they must have done, but I don't know. They called the spiderverse something else as well. It's like the humanoid arachniverse, I think it was. So so that's why, and she actually has this I think I guess it would be, I don't know if we'll call it like a bracelet, no, it's like an armband or something that's able to access different dimensions, and that's part of her thing. She's just been promoted, I guess, after 6 months of being with them. She does take the time to actually hang out with Miles for a bit, unable to help herself, she's on a mission. That's why she wasn't allowed to go there before. In fact, none of the spider people from the last movie were able to do so. So yeah, that ended up having consequences of essentially, because Miles ends up being ungrounded for a bit by his mum and says, oh, if you need to go somewhere, but don't let anyone tell you that your place is not where you are currently. Which kind of gets called back to, but weirdly enough, is just implicit this time. They don't have the classic, like, echo, even though some quotes actually do echo, like the villain ones. Those don't have being too much listened to, although who knows? Like, I can speculate about what the plan is with that. Okay, so following up on that, afterwards, Miles, who can turn invisible, by the way, actually ends up being able to follow Gwen to Mumbai Hatton or something like that. I can't remember. Different dimension where the villain that Miles fought at the beginning, the Spot, has ended up going. And this is something interesting that I guess Marvel kind of learnt from Thanos, weirdly. I haven't talked about the Spot yet because I knew that he was going to be the villain of the movie. Like, I knew that something there, someone said before that it was a big thing that, you know, he was seen as a joke villain. And, you know, I think was like meta commentary on the character itself. And then he rose to become much more of a threat, which is indeed what happened. I heard someone somewhere say that the reason why Thanos is so compelling in the MCU is because we see his growth, we see his evolution, and we see him get much more powerful and much more of a threat as time goes by. And yeah, we do that. And the Spot is the same. He starts off really, really pathetic and just expositing his backstory, which again was not handled the best way, really. Until later when he does it again, and he says that he is Miles' nemesis, and the reasons why, and actually does call back to certain events, like in the first movie. He was created during the collision explosion that Miles actually caused. And that was one thing from there. I really should turn around. Yeah, I'm going to head back. This is going nowhere. The end of the earth is this way, after all. So, yeah, and also, as a throwaway gag, in the first movie, Miles actually, as he chucks a donut at one of the scientist employees, and actually it turns out it was Spot, which was like one gag where it was like in the first movie it was a case of, oh, you know, Spider-Man wanted to get, like, not Spider-Man, good grief, Peter Parker, who was also Spider-Man, but everyone's Spider-Man, that's the whole point, everyone is Spider-Man, so new Peter in the old one, he says he goes to get a donut from the lab because that was part of his big plan. They end up swapping the hard drive that they stole and the donut, and Miles at one point just like chucks it back and it hits someone, like his first attack. So yeah, apparently that was Spot, and then afterwards he ends up mutating, becoming disfigured. No one will want to hire him. Everyone made fun of him essentially. So even Miles himself, when fighting him, treats him as a joke because he's like on the phone while it's happening as well, and not really paying attention, despite the fact that his dimensional warping powers do seem like they would be a really huge problem. And indeed they were for a bit. But yeah, but by this point, during that other fight, he ends up kicking himself in the bottom and then going into one of his own warp holes, and then turns out he's able to travel in the multiverse. And so he figures, okay, let's get stronger, go to more of those same laboratories where the experiment's going on, and I will actually subject myself to that again and get even stronger. Which is, we do see that happen in Mumbai Hatton, or whatever it was called. So while there, unfortunately, like Miles, well, several things happen. He meets probably my dad's favorite character, which was the punk version of Hobie Brown, and then also he ends up getting a vision that seems to go between his own dad and this random child, and Captain Singh, who is the police chief in the Mumbai Tatton. I'm sorry if I'm saying that name wrong. I just ended up switching out between them. So he has that vision, and then afterwards it almost comes to pass. But after failing to stop the Spot from using his laboratory thing, they have to save a bunch of people, including Captain Singh, which was apparently a canon event. As it turns out, the idea is that a bunch of like in the life of almost every single Spider-Man character, there's canon events that form them, and this is where, unfortunately, despite all of the animation things and the animation techniques and the different styles that are being combined, the Lego portion, which was animated by that 14-year-old, apparently, that and yet it was also supervised by the same people who made the Lego movie, which of course was responsible for the Spider-Verse in the first place, or this franchise of it. Despite all of that fun stuff and all of the wonderful ideas that you can only do in a world as bizarre as that, Renaissance paper vulture, semi still framed Hobby Brown or whatever it might be, and just essentially like the same kind of fun from the last movie. All of that, and the amazing music and editing and all that stuff and all the shots, whatever it might be. Unfortunately, when it comes time for the canon events and stuff, that is for me where it actually goes in a misdirection. And I'll explain what I mean. Because the canon events, of course, is that in lots of Spider-Man iterations, they ended up doing the same thing of the chief of police always dies. It's usually someone who is close to the main spider in question, and a lot of the time it is their father. And lo and behold, we find out later whose father happens to be just promoted to captain, and we've had that set up. But yeah, before we get to there, it seems that was supposed to happen in that dimension which shall not be named, because I'm sure I'm butchering it still. However, that was supposed to have been one thing that really formed that character, because I guess in that Spider-Man iteration, he actually seemed to be, everything was going breezy for him. There was no sense of real conflict or struggle that he had. He had a great girlfriend. He had very amazing ease with his powers. He was super athletic already, so he didn't work out too much for his physique. He didn't want to be super buff, which of course makes sense for Spider-Man because he's got to be agile too. And he and everything just came super easy to him. So I guess that was going to be his defining moment. So from his perspective, okay, fair enough. Having that alter would have been significant. However, isn't it a bit like, that doesn't make any sense, because if the canon event was supposed to take place and it went the exact same way, the disaster that Captain Singh was saving the child from was caused by the dimensional travelers traveling through. So I guess maybe they were supposed to not interfere with that moment, making it canon that Spider-Man would just do nothing to form more of themselves, I suppose. And which is, to be fair, what kind of happens. As it turns out, Miguel at one point actually replaced himself in a world where he was shot, but his family was alive. As it turns out, the whole universe destabilized itself. Pretty severe stuff, but he never explains like how exactly that goes on. Apparently Jess actually knows and has witnessed it before, but obviously some of the Time Patrol haven't, because they've only been around for a certain amount of time, and they have been under the guide of Miguel, making sure that that never happened again. So Miguel actually at one point actually explains to Miles why he was angry with him for preventing that cannon event, after showing him around the entire lab and showing the return machine they have and all that stuff, and stuff they have at their disposition. He also ends up meeting this character who ends up being like an avatar that's being projected across dimensions by somebody that's using a VR headset called Spiderbite, but of course it's spelled B-Y-T-E, which I think was another interesting addition. I don't know how many of these were actually based on comics, but I'm sure the vast majority of the zany characters have appeared somewhere else, just like in the first movie. Okay, so again, what else? We have... So I just realised that people are waiting for me, and I've been up in the hills for ages. They probably don't want to call me, so I don't end up being interrupted. I should have thought of that. Oh, while the sun's going down, they have some sort of distraction. Okay. So we also... So yeah, by that time, as it turns out, you know, he can't let Miles go because now he knows too much and everything, and is determined to, since he's been told by them when exactly it's going to happen to his dad, because he knows from his vision that it's going to reflect exactly what happens, and that he's able to stop it because he's done it once before. They say, oh no, you can't do that because this part of the formation of who you are. Our trauma is what makes us, and the loss of certain people in our lives ends up motivating us and making us who we are, and etc, etc. Which means that in Miguel's mind, the canon is predetermined by the personalities acquired from certain tragedies, which I guess he's able to sort of predict. However, under his tutelage, that means that would mean that that everyone just ends up going down the exact same path, and he's not, as if that was already predetermined, but no, the person determining it is him. But also, if he hadn't done any of that, I hadn't told Miles anything about that particular event, or he hadn't drawn that parallel, because Miles already knew that the Spider-Man in the past had lost a bunch of people. In fact, they say that in the first movie. They, you know, everyone, Miles thinks no one can understand him, but everyone in the Spider Patrol that they had lost somebody specifically, which meant that it already happened to them. I think Gwen was also concerned that, you know, her dad, who was at the time the captain, would end up also suffering that fate, and she would, if she was to stay, which why she never went back, also, other than being searched for by him. But yeah, again, if it's weird because Miles had already gone through that. Again, first movie, he lost his uncle, which again, who was a villain in that one. He was the Prowler. He had his own theme, for crying out loud, which I also didn't know was actually from the Spider-Verse. I actually heard it a bunch of times before, but it was like one simple like leitmotif that carries through and just like emphasizes the fear whenever this character is on screen, unique to that character, which I love. I love leitmotifs. I learned about them in music class, and I use them for a lot of my own characters, as I'm sure people are well aware. Look at that, I'm still so far away. So, yeah, it doesn't make sense because he's already had that grief motivate him, and he's already used that, and after that event, he was then ready to take his leap of faith and become Spider-Man. So everything had already happened. Not to mention as well, that after Miles escapes and tries to lure all of the spider people away from the facility so he can actually use the machine again, while he's away fighting Miguel himself, Miguel is like, oh, that spider that bit you was not from your dimension. You were never supposed to have the thing. It's all your fault. You're the original anomaly. It was never supposed to bite you, which, by the way, the spider was there because Spot actually took it. So, yeah, if I hadn't brought you to Peter Parker and saved you, he would still be alive, and he would be able to deal with the collider thing. And, which, to be fair, is actually what happened. But yeah, so, and all the anomaly stuff wouldn't have occurred, which actually also still doesn't make sense, because the Collider experiment is happening in several other dimensions at the same time, and none of the Spider-Men there were actually able to stop it at all. Even 4 of them at once. On top of that, you also have the idea that if in the first place, A, not his fault because he wasn't going to teleport it there, and B, if he was not supposed to be Spider-Man at all in the first place, why would he be bound to the same canon events and rules? If there was a canon in place for him, that means, by definition, he was always supposed to get bit. And if he wasn't supposed to, always, 100%, that means that the canon can be rewritten, as indeed occurred. Because actually, to be fair, in the real, where Peter Parker still doesn't die, who would Captain Morales be to him? If he never met Miles, then why on earth would he actually be concerned? It's ludicrous. Like, it's always the case. Time travel just ruins a bunch of stuff sometimes, even in the worlds where that's the entire gimmick, unfortunately. So yeah, Miguel's whole motivation doesn't seem to make sense. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Miles is meant to demonstrate how wrong he is, but also from a mechanical perspective, that's the one part of the movie that I can generally say does not work in my mind. That whole idea, clearly, you know what, I'm going to say, when pitch meetings eventually do the Across the Spider-Verse pitch meeting, because I know that's going to happen, I guarantee that's one of the things they will mention. I guarantee that, producer guy is going to actually bring that up and deconstruct that. So any Ryan George fans, look out for that. That's my vision for the future. And you've seen my psychic powers before. So yeah, but then he does actually go back to supposedly his original dimension. But of course, we just heard one issue with that. So eventually, Gwen also ends up getting sent back home. But thanks to Hobie, sorry, by the way, because that's how you say it in Spanish. Hobie sends, knowing that Gwen's bracelet would be denied access to other dimensions and stuff, sends his own because he just opted out of the chase. He took a liking to Miles and didn't see a point in stopping him. He's anti-establishment. So that's exactly what happened, and then Gwen makes it to Miles' dimension, and for a while, this is my favorite part of the movie, because I generally did not see this coming. I should have done, but I didn't. So what happened is that we see 2 shots of, Gwen trying to distract a bunch of the guards who were looking for Miles in the first place, going to any of his interactions. Miles is taking cover, making sure he's not seen by any of them, that he knows will be lurking around trying to look for him. Eventually ends up at the same time as Gwen destroys the Time Man from one of them and sends them back, and one of the Spider Sentinels, I guess, and is therefore leaves the coast clear for Miles to go into his room, and she stays outside. Miles also discovers that, and he goes in, so the coast is clear. And so he makes it home, and actually has this big confession moment where his mum mentions he's done something different to his hair. Interesting. But all his appearances and stuff have a reason. And he's finally ready to tell her. And so, of course, in a big moment, he reveals that he is Spider-Man. At which point, his mum says, "Who's Spider-Man?" And so he has to explain about that, and she clearly has no idea about this. And then, as it turns out, right in a certain moment, he realizes his spider-sense goes off. Gwen's spider-sense goes off. She goes inside Miles' room. It's empty. He's not there. Why? Because he's in the wrong universe. The return machine that he saw being used the person's DNA to find the original dimension. Now, if you know about how Spider-Man's created, his DNA fuses with that of the spider that bites him. Therefore, a signature from a different dimension. And that's when Miles starts glitching. And then that's when Miles glitched, I knew exactly what was happening. Then we had the panels, which for some reason go on to Gwen in that moment. He's in the wrong universe. And in that moment, it all clicked, and I was like, okay, like the amount of preparation that needed to like execute that, make sure to trick the audience in such a way, was mind-boggling. And then afterwards, his uncle Aaron, who's again died in the last film, he's alive, so he thinks the Prowler's alive. And at the moment when I saw him appear, I thought to myself, why is the Prowler theme not playing? Because that's the one musical thing I was like, wait a minute, that would make perfect sense, because that's leitmotif whenever the Prowler like first appears and becomes a threat. And that's exactly what is happening. And then indeed, he ends up being captured by his uncle, and then trying to say like, oh, you don't have to be the Prowler. To which he says, I'm not. And then we turn around, Miles is tied up to a punching bag, by the way, at this point, he's chained up. We see the real Prowler, and then the Prowler theme plays, and this time I was ready. This time I knew, because they mentioned Miles's hair being different, and like his dreads being out and such. So of course, that means there's another version of Miles in here. And if this world does not have Spider-Man, then what does Miles do? Of course, take off the mask, and he is indeed the Prowler. He's about to destroy Miles with a particular punch or something. He's begging to make sure that he's alive. Gwen has actually gone around, and at this point has brought back the squad of old Peter Parker and his baby, who he has taken with him. By the way, in the Mirth movie, Peter Parker wanted kids, and therefore he has a kid now, and that's his whole thing. This is now a parent, is super comical, and he had that because the child because thought he could raise and be like Morales, which actually is already foreshadowed in the last film. So yeah, but yeah, including them, and then you see for a bit, you see some of the cast from the last movie. Then you also see some of the ones from the new one, and then of course Gwen ties it back in her narration to the last moment that she had, and then you know, at the very beginning, you know how like in movies the beginning and the end is supposed to stick with you the most? This part, you know, the ending ties it way back to the beginning, where she says, I couldn't form part of a band, so I created my own. And that's where she's like leading the charge, the music is swelling, the close-up is on her, and then to be continued. Now, two things about this. One, it does kind of take away a bit of the value from the twist at the end, because it was all seemed like the third act climax could almost have been if Miles hadn't been in the same dimension, preventing the event, and then witnessing I somehow find a way to defeat Miguel and the Spot in some three-way battle or something. That has concluded in one movie, but of course I knew there was a sequel in the works. Unfortunately, it turns out the kids in the audience didn't. At the moment when it said continuará, which was translated into Spanish, one of them went, no, what did I pay for? Like, got up and like yelled at the screen, and everyone was laughing, and my dad and I were just like losing our minds. He said, "Did I know what was going to happen?" I was like, I had a feeling, because of course nothing can conclude anymore like it used to. It was again, it's one thing that lessens the previous movie, but that's like, again, super minor, and that is indeed the plot. Other than that one hitch at the beginning, I really like all the characters and like what they are doing, except Miguel, who, again, I guess he went from a joke to being serious too, much like the Spot did. The Spot, by the way, also does increase the level. He actually appears right at the end as well, in his like maximum form as well. And we haven't seen that. If we've seen what he's like at a superior level in the middle of the movie in the town that must not be named. So yeah, he had that. But yeah, I guess there's lots of stuff I can see happening in the next movie, where if a can event is indeed stopped, would the universe destabilize itself? Most likely, yes. So how would you prevent that? I guess that kind of ties into the Flashpoint thing that we saw, which again, just Marvel does much better than DC. Marvel does in one movie or two movies what DC does in like 20. It's quite bizarre. And yet DC always try to get ahead of the game, and it never works. So yeah. Also, okay, so that's the movie, but also a couple of things to mention as well. The Spanish dub. I was going to say before that the issue with the accents was always going to be a problem, and indeed it is, but actually not so much. This movie actually did try having given people different accents, and it, to most part, it succeeds. I say one aspect, unfortunately, that doesn't translate is Hobie Brown saying "Don't have a Scooby-Doo." I think it's supposed to have like a Cockney accent or punk accent or something like that, and so he has that, and then the panels as well. The idea of the panels themselves, like they're all still in English. So they have translation at the bottom. Sometimes, like the references, they go too fast with the subtitles and stuff. But oh well, that's details. I'm rushing right now because, and once again, I'm at the end of the world now. It is time to leave. So please leave a like or dislike, because your opinion matters. Subscribe to us already, and go watch this movie and the first one. So on that note, until next time, farewell. I had absolutely no idea that they were actually trying to paint the put some coverings over the bottom of the Oreo de Carnota. Anyway, I forgot to mention some things. So basically what I was trying to say earlier, because we had to leave essentially, I was trying to talk about like some things that were detracted from the Spanish dub and some things that it did right. So again, accents, surprisingly, they actually tried a lot, apart from Hobie Brown, who I mentioned before. His thing, I did this briefly, but basically what I meant when I mentioned the Scooby-Doo and the captions was the fact that I think the English quote is that I haven't got a Scooby-Doo or something, and that is Cockney rhyming slang, which is, so I thought I had my name for a second, getting paranoid now. Yes, so what I was saying is that it explains in the corner that it means clue, but the thing is, in the Spanish dub, all they can say is, I know the same as Scooby-Doo, who has nothing to do with the movie and nothing of anything. So who knows if they had to license him because of that. I don't know. Because there's not like a Spider Scooby or something like that. Which, by the way, Spider Scoob. That would have been, considering that most animation used to be done by Hanna-Barbera, you can imagine that they would have pulled that off at some point. Yeah, so I think that was that, and also references. References. Yes, we have, I briefly dropped on this, but we also have some live action blends. Even though I mentioned before how good the animation was, I think we had the lady from Venom, who the Spot actually talks to, blending in live action animation, which I'm sure someone's going to point out eventually and do the obligatory Roger Rabbit comparisons that everyone does in these situations. And then also we have like the recreated or the reprojected scene from the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movie, which also has the death of one of the police chiefs, of course, another Captain Stacy, who, by the way, Captain Stacy resigns halfway through a speech from Gwen, the protagonist Gwen, and it says, "Oh, you're not going to be captain anymore." Well, there you go. That's another reason why the canon can indeed change. Actually, there's a loophole that I'm sure they're going to exploit in the next movie once the reunion with Miles indeed happens. And then also, I think there was Donald Glover or someone. I think that might have been him, who was one of the anomalies who was caught as a live-action entity. But my favourite reference, of course, comes in the most, dare I say it, spectacular of forms. And yes, that is because up until now and always, my favourite rendition of Spider-Man has always been the Spectacular Spider-Man. And for a split second, I saw that one of the canon worlds and such, just like the flashpoints and everything we did before, was indeed Spectacular Spider-Man. And that was, that was, I recognise the scene and everything. However, also, actual Spectacular Spider-Man comes in all his 2D glory, being seen for the first time in ages since the show was cancelled due to licensing issues with Disney, in a Sony property no less. So who knows? Could that be a sign of things to return to normal? I don't know. Look at that sunset. Well, I mean, you can't see the sun anymore because I'm too covered by trees, but you get what I mean. All right, that's enough. I just couldn't leave it off without mentioning Spectacular Spider-Man's return. And so I know why Ian was so annoyed that the Flash TV show was not considered for the Flash movie at this point. I understand now. Once again, Marvel did what DC attempted to do at the same time as DC this time, and just nailed it much more. Who would have guessed? It's like it always happens. Yeah, definitely think I'm more of a Marvel person than a DC person, just in general. But oh well, they both have their good things. This just happens to not be one of them. Alright, that's it now. I'm done talking. I need to upload this. Wednesday's almost over, so yeah, I'm going to use the midnight exploit, the US time zones. So yeah, that's it for now. Once again, like, subscribe, all that stuff before. Watch the movie and the last one, and enjoy. I'll see you all at home. Farewell.